Now, arbitrators also have the power to make decisions about the level of proof that will be used in the consideration of evidence in the case of employee discipline. And so there's three different levels of proof that we see used across different types of hearings. And they're ordered from kind of least restrictive to most restrictive in terms of how strong and reliable and consistent and confident you have to be in the evidence. Now, the preponderance of evidence is the lowest level of proof, but this is kind of where you have greater than 50% of the evidence on your side of the argument. If you picture the blindfolded lady holding the scales of justice, that's kind of a visual representation of a preponderance of the evidence. Now, a higher level than that is clear and convincing evidence. This is where there has to be a higher level of probability that an argument is actually true and supported by the evidence. And so here you're getting more where you kind of need a super majority of good evidence in your favor. Now, beyond a reasonable doubt is the level of proof that we see in criminal proceedings. And that's where there has to really be no reasonable doubt that about the assertion being made in the case of guilt. And so there, if we were going to put a number on it in terms of confidence, a number I've seen used is 90%. So there's a less than a 10% chance that a person could be wrongly convicted. So although evidence in arbitration isn't the same as the level of kind of scrutiny you'd get in a judicial setting, there's still a lot of complexities and there's a lot of consideration of the kind of the standards of evidence. And one thing that we see organizations do is to be very careful to be clear about work rules and in order to have strong evidence that there is just cause for discipline and termination decisions. And sometimes that goes to the extent of having kind of a table of penalties. And we see here an example of that, where the different types of offenses that are possible on the job and what the penalties are on first offense, second offense, and third offense. And this kind of checklist really spells out for employees the work rules and the consequences for violating those work rules. And it helps to create consistency throughout the system if everybody knows what the rules are, and it creates maybe a norm for enforcing those consistently. And it shows that there is kind of a progressive nature to the violations. So when people get harsher penalties, there's a clear understanding that it was not necessarily a first offense. So this could be useful again as evidence in arbitration case to show that there's strong evidence of just cause in a case, that there was a forewarning, that there is a consistency, and that a decision was made with good cause. So it may be good to consider what makes for a good work rule. Rules are sometimes necessary, and the first consideration is the reasonableness in their application. Are they really necessary for an operation to be orderly and safe and efficient? And if yes, then yeah, let's have that rule. Are they stated clearly? Are they understandable to people to the level that they have clear expectations? Are the consequences of violating the rule stated clearly? Are people informed about what disciplinary action will be taken if the rule's broken. Is there consistency in application of the rule? Is it applied fairly in a reasonable fashion when we're under similar circumstances? So in the table of penalties that we looked at earlier, there was a progressive nature to the discipline. There were different consequences at the first offense, second offense, and third offense. And it's important that we have processes in discipline that are progressive. Sometimes there are other ways that we also approach this beyond this kind of table that we communicate. We may sometimes write up individual improvement plans that have a progressive discipline nature to them. So we apply increasingly severe penalties for repeated offenses that are identified, and we emphasize the expectations that we have, and we give employees opportunities to meet those expectations. So there's this focus on correction, but as there is repeated offense, there are higher levels of consequences. It may start with a oral warning, and then a written warning, and then a suspension, and then perhaps termination. Sometimes in the process of going through discipline, in the case with a union employee, there is a settlement offer made for a last chance agreement. So this is a settlement and a grievance over an employee termination that gives the employee a final chance to execute the job, but under strict conditions. For instance, those that we might see specified in progressive discipline, like we just talked about. Now, a third area that the arbitrator has power in is considering the penalty and its appropriateness. And in doing so, arbitrators look at mitigating circumstances that may have occurred. They could include the culpability of management in the problem occurring. So, for instance, if a person got fired for low productivity but was given faulty equipment, then the management might be culpable in that low productivity. It might be that the event that led to the discipline and termination was so unlikely to ever occur again that you can't attribute any kind of personal malice to the employee involved in that there really isn't a good reason because the discipline is not correcting the employee in any way. It may be that the employee's behavior is justified because of a role that he or she's performing in the union. It may be that the employee is experiencing personal life factors that so many people experience, like divorce, like the death in the family, like so many tragedies that lead people to be troubled, and that once those life circumstances are seen through, that the person is going to return to normal. And again, another mitigating factor is the work record of the employee. Do they have a long record of good work that is a testimony to their likelihood to correct themselves and to act appropriately in the future? When arbitrators find that there is some kind of irregularity in the hearing in terms of the due process of the discipline process in the organization, they can make a number of different decisions. They can nullify the whole action when management fails to maintain strict compliance with the procedures. They can disregard the noncompliance unless the employee can be shown there was some prejudice in that noncompliance. Or finally, they can penalize the organization for procedural fairness, but not say that the management's action was wrong and should be voided, but they can still penalize them for their procedural failure. One aspect of due process during the discipline procedures that receives a lot of attention is the Weingarten rule, and that is a rule that union members have the right to representation by the union when they are facing some sort of discipline by the administration. And so, and this is important for union members to know, and so it's often vigorously communicated by the union that if you're going to talk to your manager and it has some implication in terms of discipline, you have a right to have union representation, and you should have union representation. When organizations impede in that, that is oftentimes a case for an appeal on the fairness of due process of the discipline hearings.